Accused of sex trafficking, kidnapping, drugging women, and forcing them to have sex, music mogul Sean Diddy Combs returning to court. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. Any minute now, the Grammy winner will stand before a judge in New York City for a pretrial hearing on a superseding indictment. Combs faces charges of sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution, and racketeering conspiracy. Now, prosecutors have even more allegations to bring forward, alleging that Combs forced an employee to engage in sex acts and threatened others with physical force and financial harm if they didn't help him carry out the sex trafficking scheme that, by the way, lasted 2 decades. The mega producer and musician denies all accusations. Let's bring in former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani. So, Neama, tell us more about this new superseding indictment. What do you know?
Kira, this is the second superseding indictment. The first one added more victims, and this one added employees, even though there are no additional charges. And why is that important? The prosecution is trying to shore up their case, and to the extent that maybe jurors don't believe one victim like Cassie Ventura, they'll believe 2 or 3 victims. And same thing when it comes to employees, because you're seeing some of the same conduct. There is at least one allegation involving sex acts, but that force, that coercion, right? Because that's what separates sex trafficking, force, fraud, or coercion from consensual sex. And Diddy, of course, is arguing through his lawyers that the sex acts happened, but they were consensual. So both the victims and the employees are going to help prove the government's case.
So, Neama, how will all this impact Combs' trial, which is slated to begin on May 5th, right?
Yes, and in addition to being arraigned on that superseding indictment, the judge is going to talk about scheduling today, and the trial will absolutely start on May 5th. The prosecution wants to start jury selection before that in mid-April, and start the actual opening statements on May 5th. The defense wants to start jury selection on May 5th, which will take approximately 2 weeks because everyone in the country knows who Sean Diddy Combs is. And now we're talking about witnesses. So what the prosecution is trying to do is line those witnesses up so they all tell the same story of physical and sexual violence. And when I was a prosecutor, the 2 best sources of information for me were always exes: husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, and former employees. Kira, they know where the bodies are buried. So I like what the government is doing here.
Well, that was my next question. As a former prosecutor, do you believe they have a strong case here?
I do. Sometimes jurors have a tough time believing the testimony of just one victim in a he said, she said type case. But when you have victim after victim, they're telling the same story. Doesn't matter if you're Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, or P. Diddy, any abuser, it's very difficult for jurors to disbelieve all the victims. And of course, the government's not going to put the 100 plus victims on the stand that have all filed civil lawsuits, but they're going to take their 5 to 10 best witnesses, put them before that jury, and hopefully, at least for the Department of Justice, get that guilty verdict.
And we reported that prosecutors have even more allegations now to bring forward. Do you think that's more victims that finally decided to go on record with them? What are your thoughts about that?
So there's 2 things going on. Some victims may not want to tell their story in a very public way. It may re-victimize them. So if you're the prosecution, if you're the assistant U.S. attorneys who are handling this case, first you got to go and say, who do I think are my best victims? Obviously, Cassie Ventura has to be at the top of the list. She had the longest relationship with Diddy, and there is that video that we've all seen. Of course, the defense is saying it's doctored, of Diddy beating Ventura at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. So she's going to be the star witness in the case, but you don't want to just rely on her. You want to go through the other victims and analyze their stories. Make sure there's no inconsistencies. They may be innocent mistakes, but of course, the defense is going to argue that those are all lies. So after you do that analysis of who you think are the best witnesses, you're going to go to the victims and their lawyers and make sure that they're prepared to take the stand in this case and testify against their alleged abuser.
Neama Rahmani, thank you so much. Appreciate your insight.
Thanks, Kira. Talk soon.
You bet.